There we go. All right, so writing is not just for English majors. A lot of times when we think about writing, we assume that it is reserved for those very distinct professions. But you probably are getting an idea now that writing is necessary regardless of your major. Yes? Are we still writing papers in our major courses? Exactly. So what I want to begin with today is just a discussion about some of the basic principles that should guide all of our writing exercises and activities. In this presentation, I said I was going to cover a lot, right? We're going to talk about some of the basic principles of writing. We're going to talk about some of the distinct differences between professional writing versus academic writing, because the way writing looks in school is a little different than the way it will look outside of school. But some of the basic principles still apply. We'll get into some of the academic principles that we are probably quite familiar with now. We'll review some of that. Talk about some specific types of academic writing, whether you're in the social sciences or other areas. We'll look at some specific examples, and then we'll end the presentation today with some things that are going to be relevant to your life outside of academia, kinds of writing that will be necessary to get you into the workplace, which is, of course, the ultimate goal, right? All right, so let's get there. First of all, I want to talk about some basic principles of communication, because obviously that's what writing is. It's a form of communication, right? When we talk about communication and interacting, we are talking about the way in which we exist in what we call discourse communities. Every discourse community has its own set of practices and common language that is used. So a discourse community is a set of people who use a common language for interaction, and we all operate within several of those types of communities. Communities are defined by the discourse or commonly shared aims or objectives within them. Discourse communities operate in forums where the community members participate in a preferred manner. So if we think about some of the discourse communities that we're members of, we may begin to recognize the way in which they sort of operate under sort of assumptions and expectations of those who are a part of those particular groups. Each discourse community has its own practices, goals, objectives, and values. And to be successful within any discourse community, or even to be considered a part of one, you will have to acquire a certain proficiency in these practices. And that is kind of why we're here. So what are we talking about when we speak about discourse community? I'm not just talking about within academia, right? There's a reason why you speak and act in a particular way when you're hanging out with your friends versus when you're talking to your professors, right? Because you are members of a particular discourse community when you're hanging with your friends. You may be a member of a sorority or some club, or you just may have a circle of friends that has its own sort of history. And then when you step into a different space and you're interacting with other people, it's for different purposes, right? There's certain expectations when you are in a classroom, when you are of a particular major, and those individuals within those spaces communicate in a particular way. All right, so what I want you to keep in mind is that with all the different types of writing that I talk about today, you're thinking about the space within which that writing exists, because it's a form of communication, and it will always be within the context of some discourse community. And so what you will have to think about going into any writing moment is, who is it that I'm speaking to? Within what context am I creating this message, and how will it best be received on the basis of those expectations within that particular group? So one thing that every writer should know, well, not one thing, several things. First of all, the purpose of each paper will vary based on discipline, because of the very reason I just spoke about. However, some of the basic principles still apply. Every specialty or field has a certain language, jargon, a genre, which is a type of writing. So it may be an essay versus a personal statement. Those are going to take on a slightly different form, and convention that has to do with writing practices. So within particular disciplines, there are certain types of writing that are used. And the way in which to write well within any of those areas is to understand what convention and jargon and forms are used. mechanics of writing, what we typically refer to as grammar, is always relevant. So anytime I'm doing a workshop on commas, y'all come on through because you're gonna need to know that. And the message matters, any message that you construct, but the burden of proof is on you. Sometimes when we write for a specialized audience, we assume that that audience knows what we're talking about. But regardless of who you're writing for, you should always assume that it's on you to make it clear. Don't make those assumptions, but remember that the burden is on you. And then, just in general, get into the habit of reading. Read in your particular discipline, but read just anything you can get your hands on, because the reality is, the more you read, the better you will be at writing also. Oh, that went too fast. No, I'm good. All right, so let's talk about some differences between professional writing and academic writing. When we talk about professional writing, we're talking about business letters or memos, professional correspondence in the form of an email, personal statements, resumes, cover letters, proposals, reports, and white papers. There's all kinds of writing that falls under professional writing. We are not going to get too much into these last two. We'll touch a little bit on proposals and reports, but we will talk about these others that I mentioned here. When we talk about academic writing, typically, it's what you're familiar with. Essays, lab reports, research papers, those are sort of the standard forms that academic writing takes. Let's talk a little bit about academic writing in terms of the style, tone, structure, and conventions that we are probably quite familiar with at this point. So when we talk about the tone of academic writing, it will vary slightly depending on the particular subject area and academic discipline that you are writing for. In humanities, we tend to use active voice, first person. In the sciences, you tend to use the third person, sort of a more objective stance. But there are sort of basic principles that apply overall. Typically, academic writing aims to be objective. Inclusive language is important. We want to make sure that we're not using sexist language. We talk about his and her, not just his, and that sort of thing. You want to be concise, to the point. Sometimes we think in academics, we assume that more is better, but not necessarily. It's about being to the point and as clear and specific as possible. And of course, the level of formality is higher when we talk about academic forms. One way to kind of know the tone and style that you should have when you're writing is to pay attention to the works that you read for your courses. They set the model for what is expected. And as you're reading, you should be sort of paying attention to the way in which authors of the text that you're studying use language as well. Now, as I say that, you want to still be clear and concise. So sometimes writers, when they're trying to sound academic, err on the side of confusion, right? You're just trying to use a whole bunch of big words that you don't know the meaning of either. But remember, the burden of proof is on you in terms of making it clear. So if you don't know the meaning of a word, don't use it. Use a simpler word that you do understand and that will convey the point of your message. And you will gradually begin to build that vocabulary as you read more, and you'll be able to use sort of the heavier, high and mighty language. But overall, you can kind of follow the models that you study to know how to proceed. So academic writing is different from personal writing because it follows its own set of rules and practices. Ideas are usually organized in a formal order or structure. They are supported by references from academic literature. In contrast to personal writing, academic writing deals with the theories and causes of a given topic, as well as exploring alternatives for those theories or events. And academic writing adheres to traditional conventions, punctuation, grammar, and spelling, of course. One thing that's really important when you're doing academic writing is to make sure that you are understanding for yourself what the information is that you're speaking about. A lot of times when we get into writing research papers, it's easy to kind of get lost in all the stuff, and it's easier just to cut and paste into our paper and hope for the best. But again, going back to the importance of reading, if you first understand what you have read, and the point that you want to make, you will be a lot better off. It's not enough just to cite or quote someone if you're not clear yourself on the subject matter. So academic writing is first about acquiring knowledge before you begin to construct any message. Of course, we know the format for an essay, right? You always begin with an introductory paragraph, followed by body paragraphs that support some main point or thesis that is being made, and the body paragraphs are used to develop that support. Now, it's important to remember that each paragraph develops only one point. So if you got 5 things going on in one paragraph, you probably need to break that up and make sure that you're explaining each one. The final paragraph or conclusion summarizes what was said in the paper. So you want to think of it as kind of wrap up and restate what was initially, no, not now. Oh, really? Can we snooze this? Okay, thank you. Your concluding paragraph should, as I said, kind of wrap up and restate what was initially said. It may also include an implication, what information was in the body of the paper, what that might imply for future study. But typically, you do not want to begin a new topic or introduce a new topic in your final paragraph. All right. When it comes to reports, though, slightly different format, not entirely different, but the difference for reports is that they are organized around identifying problems or difficulties and the corresponding solutions. Unlike most essays, a report is divided according to clearly labeled sections, such as the introduction, discussion, conclusions, and recommendations. Also, unlike an essay, reports allow bulleted points in the conclusions and recommendation sections. The structure of reports in academia are similar to the reports that you might write in the business world. They follow that similar structure, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of business writing, but I just wanted to mention that in terms of form. Those subdivisions and categories, identifying the problem, the solution, and the methods are very important in this type of writing. So when we talk about report writing in the social sciences, characteristics of research papers in social sciences is primary research. Interviews, surveys, and questionnaires are important. Those of you in social sciences agree. You use primary research. What are we talking about when we speak of primary versus secondary research? Do we know the difference? Anyone? Okay, great. Primary research is when you interact directly with the source of the information. That's through the interview, through gathering of perspectives by use of a survey or questionnaire. Secondary research would be the use of this type of information that's published by someone else. So the reports that are written by others who have done primary research would be considered secondary. That's when you go into that academic journal or pull the book, that particular topic, and cite it in your paper. That would be secondary research. So primary research, particularly used specifically in the social sciences, is when you yourself go and gather that information and then publish it in your paper and utilize it as the basis of your paper, in fact, where you formulate a question or hypothesis and develop a hypothesis that may answer the question. You will predict the results based on your hypothesis, record the observation of the experiment that you're doing, and then accept or reject the hypothesis based on the experiment results. So you are the one sort of doing all of that, all of those things that maybe in a secondary source you would have just read about. So APA is the style that is used in the social sciences, and I have on here a link to the Purdue OWL website that has for you an example of a paper that would be written in that field, and they have great marginal notes on every aspect of that paper and that report and what needs to be included. So I encourage you, I'm not going to go through all of it because I have other stuff I want to get to, but I wanted to just show you sort of what that should look like and where you can find out more about how to put a paper like that together. All right, science and technology is, as you know, very much about the work that you do in the lab and developing a lab report based on that. So some basic aspects of a lab report should be an introductory paragraph that answers these questions. What are you doing? What do you expect to find and why? What principles are you trying to demonstrate or prove? And develop a hypothesis. Very similar to the social science one, right? Methods. So again, these are the headings that you should have. What materials or methods were used in collecting the data? What results came about? You want to explain those. You're going to be using graphs and charts to represent those results. And then there will be a discussion where you answer questions like, what did you find? Did it fit with your hypothesis? How might the results be improved? How do your results compare to that of others? So in this case, you would be doing not only primary research, but also secondary research in order to compare your results with those of others. And then your conclusion will wrap up and do an analysis of your results and try to come to some conclusion about what it means. And in the conclusion, you might also suggest next steps for further research on that particular thing. So the lab report is a narrative telling the why and how of what was found. Students should develop an idea or question and answer the questions that arise. So one prominent aspect of these types of papers is the abstract. And the abstract is that wonderful thing that you all use when you're doing research yourself. And you can read just that without having to read the whole thing, right? Of course, the important thing when you're doing research is not to only read the abstract for the papers that you're writing, okay? So you use that to determine what sources will be best for you. And then you actually read the whole thing for those that are relevant to your research. But when you're writing an abstract, keep in mind that it is a very important part of the paper, likely to be read by more people than the actual paper itself, because just like when you're doing research, it's the one thing that you read, even if you don't read the rest. Therefore, it should not be vague, okay? It should be a brief restatement, or a brief statement rather, of the essential information that's contained within the report. Keep in mind how useful it is when you come across an abstract that gives you everything that's in the report. You want to write yours that way as well. So in order to write a good abstract, you actually have to write it after you've completed the paper. How do you know what you said until you say it, right? So write the report first and then summarize what you did in the report in your abstract. And by the way, just pausing there for a second, in general, when you're writing an essay or a report or anything, don't be bound by thinking it has to be written in the order that it will ultimately be in. You have to write wherever you are in the process. That's what revision is for. That's also why you give yourself enough time to do the work, right? Because you're gonna have to go back and rework things and move things around into a logical order. So don't feel like, oh, I can't write the body yet because I have to get my introduction figured out. You probably have to write the body yet in order to know how to write the introduction. Okay, so that same thing applies with the abstract. So there's two types of abstracts. One is informational and the other is descriptive. The informational abstract communicates the contents of the report. It includes the purpose, method, scope, results, conclusion, and recommendations, and it highlights the essential points. So it's not a restatement of the whole paper, but it is a summary of all the main things, the main parts of it. They are short, from a paragraph to a page or two, depending upon the length of the entire report. And it allows the reader to decide whether they want to read the rest. A descriptive abstract is a little bit more of a preview. So it tells what the report contains, includes purpose, methods, scope, but not the results and conclusion, recommendations, It's very short, and it introduces the subject so that readers then have to read the rest to find out what happened. So you'll need to find out which of the two types of abstracts your professors prefer for any given assignment. They may want the descriptive one, or they may prefer the other one. What did I call it? I can't remember. The one that tells everything up front. What was it? I'm getting old. Informational, yes. Informational versus descriptive. So you'll need to know which your professor prefers. Okay, so here are the qualities of a good abstract. It uses one or more well-developed paragraphs, which are unified, coherent, concise, and able to stand alone. It uses an introduction, body, conclusion structure in which the parts of the report are discussed in order, beginning with purpose, findings, and then ending with conclusions and recommendations. It provides a logical connection between the material included and adds no new information, but simply summarizes the report. It also should be intelligible to a wide audience. Once again, you want to be mindful of who it is that is reading this information. It is not confined to your teacher. It's not confined to the professionals in your field. Think of it in the way that you use it when you come across an abstract yourself. You pass right over those ones that make no sense to you, right? So you want to write these as if you're writing it to those who may or may not be experts in the field. Clear language that's simple enough to be understood by anyone. All right, whole lot of stuff. Now we're transitioning. Any questions before I move from academic writing to business and professional writing? All right, so here we go. When we talk about business writing, a few things we want to be mindful of. Business communication, there's those words again, should be clear and concise. As such, you should consider 4 factors when writing professional communication: purpose, audience, organization, and style. First of all, we want to think about the purpose for business writing as opposed to other types of writing. One thing, this sort of is the framework for everything that we think about when doing business writing in particular. 3 basic purposes that business writing typically has: either to inform, request, or persuade, or some combination of those, and always to build goodwill. Regardless of whether you're doing any one of these 3, building goodwill is important because it creates a good image of yourself and your organization, the kind of image that makes people want to do business with you, whether that is business with your organization or business with you personally in terms of getting a job. So, for example, the purpose of school writing is to show you've learned course material or demonstrate intelligence. The purpose for business writing is to meet the organizational need or the personally professional need. Okay, so you're not just demonstrating knowledge when you're writing in a business setting or professional setting. There is a specific need: request, inform, persuade, and build goodwill. Audience is very important, as always. It dictates the tone, formality, and content. We just talked about the academic audience that requires a higher level of formality. In business, the tone and style will be dictated by the specific audience that you're communicating with, which may be different and often is less formal. So what are we talking about when we say tone? We are talking about the mood, style, voice, cadence, and inflection. Think about that usually when we're speaking, but it can also be conveyed in writing. It has to do with the author's attitude towards his subject, whether serious or amused or authoritative. And it has everything to do with the word choice and order. It's how you can create a particular tone in your writing. The audience for business communication includes people both inside and outside of the organization. Real audiences pay attention to messages only if they seem important, relevant, and interesting. That is really, really important. When it comes to business or professional writing, you are always communicating with more than one audience, and that may be individuals within or outside of the organization. And that should be in mind as you construct any message. In school, although information may be new to you, most professors already know and understand the material you're communicating about, which is why you sometimes have to remember to say more, not less, because you think, oh, my teacher already knows this, right? Well, in professional writing, the information you're sending is always new to the reader. So you want to be thinking about what all they need to know in order for you to get the outcome that you're hoping for. Business communication is organized to meet the psychological needs of the reader, and so it should be friendly, not formal, short words and a mix of sentences and paragraph length. In school, you often are following the traditional forms that we've already talked about, and formal and big words, long sentences are sometimes rewarded. In business writing, you want to think about people that are on the move, doing business. They're typically going to skim the documents or the messages that are sent in order to assess the main points. So you want to formulate the information in a way that is conducive to their still getting it and being able to follow through. So you want to choose from the most among the most effective ways to convey information in the business setting. Whereas in school, except for math, construction, engineering, very few classes expect writing to contain anything other than words. However, in business communication, pictures can also speak loudly, and they are utilized in visuals, graphs, tables, and that sort of thing are typically going to be more appropriate in that context. So we're going to talk about these specific kinds of business and professional writing: letters and memos, personal statements, resumes, and cover letters. Does anyone write letters anymore? They actually do in the professional setting, in business setting. I don't know how many of you have written a letter lately, but we do need to remember how. Business letters, as we said before, are meant to inform, request, persuade, and build goodwill, and memos do the same. We're going to talk about the difference between a letter and a memo. Your audience for a letter is individuals outside of the organization. Some organizations write letters within, they use the letter format for communication within the organization. But typically, memos are the form that is used for inter-office or inter-organizational communication. When it comes to letters, there are various styles of business letters that we'll look at, either a block or modified block. Memos are pretty standard. They are very much like the email format, which is actually how email copied the form of a memo, with the to, from, date, and subject in the header. And we'll look at examples. So there may be slight variations to the style that I will show you. But again, going back to our conversation about discourse communities, your particular organization will have its own version of these, and you just want to be consistent with the style that is used within the particular organization that you are working for. Let's look at a standard business letter. This is using block format, in which everything is flush left margin. And this particular block format often does not use punctuation for the greeting, after the greeting and the salutation or the close. But sometimes you can do what's sort of a mixture of the block versus the modified block, in which you do have the punctuation in these parts of the letter. But you begin with the date, your address, the person who you're addressing, and then everything is flush left margin. This is a modified block format. Notice that this time the address is centered rather than flush left. And this is your address here, the person's address here that you're speaking to. Back up. And in this example, there is no punctuation after the greeting and close, but it is optional to put a comma or colon here and a comma here. Okay, memos. So the letters that we just looked at would be for communicating with those outside of the organization. When you're communicating with someone within the same institution or organization that you are a part of, this is the format that would be used. Again, the to, from, date, and subject, and then the message would be single space with one space between each paragraph that's within the body of the memo. You want to be thoughtful in particular about how you word your subject line. The subject line is that sort of indicator of what this message is about, and it will determine whether or not the reader ignores it or opens it. So you want to think about what will capture their attention, what is it that you really need them to know about this message, and in some way you want to articulate that in your subject line. Also, you notice that there are initials next to the name of the person who sends the memo. That indicates that the person who wrote this actually wrote it and they have signed off on it. Sometimes managers and organizational leaders will have their secretary or some administrative assistant write the memo for them. This indicates that they read over it and they are signing off on it. So that's important as well. You don't want someone sending memos in your name and you didn't know it. So it indicates that you did see it. Okay, that was business writing. Now we're moving into the more personal, professional writing that you might do, such as personal statements, resumes, and cover letters. So what are we talking about when we talk about personal statements? Those are those essays or stories of your life that you have to write when you're applying for a scholarship or to get into some particular program. And there are actually two types of personal statements. One is the general, sort of comprehensive, tell me the story of your life kind of personal statement. And the other is the one that is in response to a very specific question. So depending on the program or organization that you're applying to, it will be one or the other. And so we are going to just kind of talk about some of the ways to do a personal statement well. First of all, you want to ask yourself some questions. Writing a personal statement can seem really daunting. If you come in here to get help with writing a personal statement, we're going to first of all sit down and just kind of talk to you about your life. And we're going to ask you just to kind of brainstorm some things that you might want to put into a personal statement. It will be very much determined by what it is that you're trying to accomplish and how it is you want to represent yourself to the organization that you are applying to. And it has as much to do with who you are as who they are. So it's not just telling your story, but it's how you can connect your story to their goals and their mission so that they will want to bring you in. Okay? So what is it about you that makes you special? What is special about your story? What details of your life might help the committee to understand you? When did you become interested in the field that you are applying to? And what have you learned about it? How have you learned about this field? You want to think in terms of specific ways that you can demonstrate your knowledge. If you have worked a lot during your college years, what have you learned? And how has that work contributed to your growth? What are your career goals? And are there any gaps or discrepancies in your academic progress that need to be explained? So if your test scores aren't great, but you made all A's, you need to talk about that. You can't ignore it. It's better to speak to it up front rather than see it and dismiss you, right? So you want to find ways to talk about yourself in a positive tone, particularly if you have overcome some obstacles. If there's an indication in your academic record that you were sort of flunking out in the first year of college, but every year after that, you see your grades going up, that's something you can talk about in a personal statement, which in a way that shows your progress to this point and your readiness to do good work in the future. What personal characteristics do you possess? And is there a way to demonstrate that? It's not enough to say I'm a really caring person. You got to show in some way how you have cared for someone. What skills, for example, leadership or communication or critical thinking do you possess? Again, demonstrate that in some small anecdote from your life. Why might you be a stronger candidate for graduate school and more successful and effective in the profession, in the professional field than other applicants? You want to be thinking of ways in which you can distinguish yourself. And what are the most compelling reasons you can give for the admissions committee to be interested in you? So after you've sort of taken an account of your life and answered all of those questions the best way you can, then we have to figure out how to put that into the personal statement itself. First of all, you want to answer the question that was asked. There is nothing more important than simply following instructions whenever you are responding to a call for some particular thing, whether it's a scholarship or what have you. Answer the question that was asked. Don't digress or get away from the subject because they're going to throw you out immediately. Also, don't be tempted to use the same statement for all applications. It is important to answer each question that is asked, and if slightly different answers are needed, you should write separate statements for those specific ones. If you try to just use the same one for multiple calls, there will likely be some disconnect. Again, we talked about telling your story and connecting the characteristics that you described to very specific instances that have occurred in your life. That is how you'll distinguish yourself. Be specific. For example, state that you would make, if you say that you would make an excellent doctor, be able to back that up in some way. Your desire to become a lawyer, engineer, or whatever should be logical, the result of specific experiences that you've described in your statement. Your application should emerge as the logical conclusion to your story. Now, not everybody has a dramatic story or wonderful, crazy things that you've overcome. So some of us may have to work a little harder than others to find our hook. But all of us has something unique or special about us. It's just a matter of figuring out the best way to demonstrate that. And we can help you with that. You come in and talk to us about a personal statement that you're working on. Concentrate on your opening paragraph. As you remember, the audience is going to be captured first by the first part of what you've read. If they're bored in the first paragraph, they're probably not going to read on. So the leader opening should grab their attention and become the framework for the rest of the statement. In the same way that the thesis statement sort of guides the rest of the paper, your introductory paragraph should do the same. And then the body would develop that and demonstrate that and give those specific ways in which what you've said about yourself is true. There are certain things best left out of a personal statement. For example, references to experiences or accomplishments in high school or earlier are not really a good idea. You also don't want to get into any controversial or political topics in your essay or in your personal statement. I would say unless there is a specific organization that you're applying to that is political in nature, then it might be appropriate, but typically avoiding those controversial hot-button issues is best. And then you may need to do some research. It's going to be really important for you to understand the organization that you are applying to. And if you can connect something about yourself to something about that organization that indicates your knowledge of what they do and what they're about, that will go over very well. So you want to do your homework and make sure that you know who it is that you're speaking to and what it is that they value. Of course, as I said before, grammar and punctuation is always going to be important at some point. And so they have indicated that personal statements, various organizations have indicated that personal statements that are well written and grammatically correct are seen in a lot more positive light than those that are full of errors. And then you want to avoid cliches. A medical school applicant who writes that he is good at science and wants to help other people is not exactly expressing original thoughts. We always have to find a way or think of a way that we can be unique in the way that we discuss our goals and aspirations. So what I have here, I'm not going to read her entire personal statement, but this is a student who I know who is now doing her residency. She in undergrad, however, was an English major and a chemistry minor, and she went from undergrad, applied, and was admitted into medical school. So she has a very unique angle simply by virtue of that. She is a person who is very creative and very much who you would assume would go into such a field in the humanities. But she does have a love for medicine, and she's extremely intelligent. And so she had that unique angle in to work with as she was telling her story. And on her website, on her webpage, I'll show you it in just a minute, she shares with us her own personal statements, which I think you should read to get a feel for how you might do it. There's not an exact science to writing a personal statement because it is so unique to you and what you have been through. But I think she does a really good job, particularly in the medical school personal statement, sort of laying out who she is. You really kind of connect to her as a person, and I can see how the administrators of her program were wanting to know more. And so she begins by talking about the fact that she's an English major and not what you would expect in a typical applicant. But just to give you a little bit about her, this is her website, and she, let's see, she is a style maven in addition to everything else. So really fascinating to go on her site and see all the things that she does in addition to being very academic and intellectual. So I'll let you look at that in your own time. Let's get back to. All right, so let's talk about then the resume and cover letter. Another type of writing that involves sort of telling others about ourselves and trying to sell ourselves to someone in order for them to want us to be a part of their particular discourse community. So a resume is a persuasive summary of your qualifications for employment. Sometimes resumes are also used for scholarship programs that you might be applying to as well. Creating a strong resume is not an exact science, but you should also have a custom resume for each job that you apply for. So you don't want to have just a general resume that you send out to everyone. You want it to be very specific, and so you may end up having multiple versions of your resume to use for specific positions that you're applying to. Along with the resume, it's a good idea to have a cover letter. We've already talked about the format that letters would take. You a lot of times will accompany your resume with a letter that sort of brings attention to those important things in the resume that you want your audience to make note of. It begins with a summary statement that identifies the position that you're applying for and the major qualifications that you possess. The body of the letter will develop those in a little bit more detail, and I advise you to also point to or make reference to the resume in the body of your cover letter. And in my resume, you'll notice that I have done X, Y, and Z. And then connect qualifications to the organizational needs. So you talk about, I recognize that your company is one that does this, this, and this. I have had similar experience by working here, there, or what have you. And then you want to close your cover letter with a request for an interview. Now, we gave them an example of a cover letter, yes? Everybody has on your desk, on your table, a cover letter example, and I want you to take a look at that. Okay, so it's the handout that says a prospecting letter from a career changer, and this gives you an idea of the format that a letter like this would take and the parts of it that I just described. So notice that this writer has created their own sort of letterhead at the top, similar to what maybe would be on their resume. that provides their name and their contact information. This one is formatted with the block style. As you can see, everything is flush left margin. In the introduction, it refers to the enclosed resume, as I mentioned. Shows knowledge of the company in the second paragraph, but also shows how she can reach or meet the company's needs in the third paragraph. It's a good idea to use, again, the jargon and the language of the organization that you're applying to as much as possible. And then she ends the letter with a request for a meeting, as you can see. I will call you next week to find a mutually convenient time when we can discuss putting my talents to work. So this is an example of how you might do that. Now, when it comes to putting together the resume that would go along with this cover letter, there are two ways that you might construct your resume. Also, we are going to talk today about the traditional paper resume, but a lot of companies are moving to scannable resumes. And this is where all the formatting is taken out and it's just everything flush left margin, and you want to have keywords embedded within. We're not going to talk so much about that, but the particular organization that you're applying to will have specific instructions for what it is they want you to submit. Okay, so some do's and don'ts when it comes to putting together your resume. You want to show how your qualifications fit the job and the company. You want to show how the work that you have done in the past helped the organization that you were a part of. You want to list skills and experiences for paid and unpaid work. A lot of times students think, oh, I don't have a resume because I haven't ever had a job. But you probably babysat, cut grass during the summer, maybe you volunteered for Boys and Girls Club. All of that work can count towards experience that you've had that might be transferable to a company that you want to work for. As I mentioned, you want to familiarize yourself with the buzzwords and industry jargon so that you can talk about the experiences you've had using the same kind of language that they use. And then in your objective statement on your resume, it's a good idea to name the specific company or organization that you're applying to, rather than just saying college graduate looking for a job in engineering. Why not say specifically what it is that you want to do for this company in your objective statement? What you don't want to do is list duties without any value added. You don't want to use long sentences or paragraphs. This is one time when the structure and form is expected to be brief and fragments that are listed. And then you don't want to include any irrelevant skills or experience. You want to think in terms of, once again, your objective statement, like a thesis statement, is what it is that you are proving with the information that you include in the rest of this particular document. You want to make sure that you are showing that and nothing else. So there's two types of resumes that you might use. One is a chronological resume where you list the jobs that you've had in the order that you have had them, well, beginning with the most recent and working your way backwards. Or you may construct a skills resume in which the information is organized around the skills that you have and not the dates in any particular order. As I mentioned before, objective statements, backing up for a moment, should sound like the job description that an employer might use in a job listing. Tell what you want to do and what level of responsibility you want to hold. So here's an example of an objective statement on a resume that is less effective. To offer a company my excellent academic foundation in hospital technology and my outstanding skills in oral and written communication. Very broad, very general, just sort of Hail Mary, I'll take whatever you give me kind of thing. Whereas in a more effective objective statement says, to sell state-of-the-art Siemens medical equipment, assuming that you're applying to this particular company, right? So it says, this is what I want to do for you, rather than just, this is what I want to do in general. So on your table, we have some sample resumes. Let's take a look at those and see the difference in the way that these applicants organize their experience. Let's first look at the chronological resume. So the chronological resume is one that you would use if you've sort of had the traditional step-by-step progression through life. You had a job all through college, and then maybe you had an entry-level position when you graduated, and everything just kind of fell in place just perfectly. Sometimes it happens. So this is one that shows how you might organize this type of resume. Notice the top where the person's name is prominent and their contact information begins with their education. So that's one thing that all of you can certainly have. You want to list your GPA if it's 3.0 or above. If it isn't, just leave that part off. Just say, Alabama A&M, and the degree that you're pursuing, the expected date of graduation. And then you want to list your experience. You want to identify where the experience was, the organization that you worked for or volunteered for, and then what you did. Notice the way that those bulleted experiences and activities are listed, using active verbs and connecting what was done to how it added value in some way. Calculated material, labor, and equipment needed for projects. Analyzed cost and productivity. Monitored safety and quality assurance. These are the things, these again are those words you want to pull from the job description, right? So if the job is asking for someone who has experience in analysis or particular types of equipment, you want to try to use whatever language you can that is relevant to what you did. And then at the bottom they have the references. You want to include at least 3, and at least one who was an employer or instructor, someone who supervised your work is a good idea when you're thinking of what references to list. Any questions about this format? White space is really important. You want to have some space around the margins. You want to have some space within, between the entries. If you don't have a whole lot of experience, that will be easy. If you do have a lot of experience, you may have to carry it over to a second page, which is okay, if there's enough to include on the second page. The second example is one that is not chronological, but skills, organized around skills. And notice that the headings are different, right? In this case, the headings are very specific to the kind of work that this person wants to do and has done. So skills in construction management, experience with construction supplies and equipment. These headings are going to be determined by, again, who it is that you're applying to, that you know would catch the employer's eye. They're going to want somebody who has skills in construction management. They're going to want someone who has experience with construction supplies and equipment. So those headings will be determined by what it is that you're trying to do or show. In particular, you want to look at the experience that you have and the skills that you've acquired, and you will list those in a way that's really clear. Any questions? I know I've covered a whole lot of stuff. We've gone from academics all the way to personal writing. What are your thoughts or questions or concerns as you look at the examples or as you think about some of the things that I've shared with you today? How many of you have a resume or started one? Good. Have you chosen to do a more chronological style or one that's skills based? Skills, chronological, okay. Does it look anything like either of these? Do you see things that you might want to do differently on yours? Okay, yeah. All right, very good. So, I have included references to the resources that I used for the information within the presentation, and as I said, this will be available to you on our website. And as always, we welcome you to come by and get help with any of the writing projects or activities that you have, and we'd be happy to help. Thank you all for coming out. Please make sure that you have signed our workshop sign-in. We need everyone to do a survey as well before you leave, Ariana, how does everybody want? Okay, so if you just take a couple of minutes to fill that out, we'd love your feedback. And look forward to seeing you next time. Oh, our next workshop, for those who are interested, right around Halloween on October 30th, we're doing a fiction writing workshop. And Mr. Beechler is going to talk to us about how to write scary stories. So just in time for Halloween, y'all make sure you come through.
He's the perfect person to write scary stories.
Yes.
Here, I found these in the classroom, just sketch